The film starts with Beauty Stewart awakening from a bad dream. It is 1945 in Jersey, and her significant other was battling in France, yet he still can't seem to get back, despite the fact that the conflict has finished. She resides in a major, unpleasant house alone with her two children, Anne and Nicholas. As of late, close to possibly 14 days prior, every one of the workers recently increased and deserted them, without a word or gathering their wages. 3 workers, Quiet Lydia, Mr. Tuttle, and Mrs. Bertha Factories, come to her entryway, to answer a promotion that Kidman had posted for new workers. They are undeniably displayed around the house by Beauty, who makes sense of the standards: one must never open an entryway without shutting the past one. And the curtains should constantly be closed on the grounds that her kids are photosensitive. They break out in rashes and wounds in the event that they are presented to light more grounded than candlelight. At some point, Beauty goes to the post box and sees that the letters she'd conveyed to the paper reporting positions are still there. She faces Mrs. Factories irately, requesting to know what their identity is. And how could they are aware of the positions on the off chance that the promotion hasn't as yet even emerged. Mrs. Factories then, at that point, lets Elegance know that each of them 3 had used to reside in the house, and had cherished it such a lot of that they returned to check whether they could be of any utilization, as a house as large as Kidman's in every case needs additional assistance. At the point when she invited them, thinking they had paid all due respects to the promotion, they just didn't have any desire to tell her in any case. Abnormal things occur in the house. Some of the time, there are individuals talking and murmuring and crying. Crashes and clamors come from void rooms, and converses with an imperceptible kid, Victor, Alexander Vince, and demands that there are others strolling around the house. Beauty won't trust her, and oftentimes advises her to stop and rebuffs her for lying. Mrs. Plants guarantees Anne that she accepts her and that soon her mom will see. Mrs. Factories then lets Elegance know that occasionally the universe of the living gets stirred up in the realm of the dead. Beauty won't accept until one day, she is sewing Anne's most memorable fellowship cloak when she heard crashes higher up. She competitions to explore, however there's nobody there, and she finds in the mirror that the entryway is shutting without help from anyone else. Beauty then, at that point, goes on a chase to search out the gatecrashers, enrolling her entire family, and this is the first of a few such hunts. She then, at that point, needs her home favored, so she goes out to track down the minister. Mrs. Plants races after her and tells her not to go. Effortlessness leaves in Mrs. Factories converses with Mr. Tuttle, who's accomplishing the grass work. She says that in the long run it'll all emerge and advises him to conceal these headstones on the property. Beauty becomes mixed up in the fog and she tracks down her better half, who looks lost and extremely out of it, and brings him home. He will not talk or do anything aside from remaining in bed. Presently Elegance, who'd recently begun to have confidence in the gatecrashers, return into willfulness. Her girl shows her the image she'd drawn, of Victor and his folks, counting a musician father who played the piano undetectably one evening, and of the elderly person, with blind eyes. In one of her chases after the gatecrashers, Kidman finds a book of photography, remembering this book for which there are individuals presented and dozing, until Mrs. Factories lets them know that those individuals are dead, and that it's a book of the dead, which the odd accepted would watch the spirits of those dead. Effortlessness and her girl are putting the last little details on her fellowship dress when Elegance needs to leave briefly. She returns and is sickened to see that besides the fact that her little girl sitting on is the floor in her perfect dress, however she's turned into this dreadful elderly person, so she gets her little girl in a stranglehold and begins to shout and hit her. The cloak rips off to uncover that it is her girl, crying. She then, at that point, takes off. Beauty is shaken as she suspects she's gone frantic. Then, at that point, returning to her significant other's room, he tells her that Anne has told him of what had happened 7 days prior. Beauty separates and cries and fights that it wasn't her shortcoming. However, at that point he tells her that he needs to leave, and she knows that for every last bit of her reasons he really wants something past her family and herself. Moreover, her better half, who had come from inside the haze amazed and confounded, at long last disappears, saying that he should get back to the conflict. In any case, Elegance had let him know that the conflict was finished. Without much of any result, he leaves. so he leaves, and the following morning the shades are no more. The youngsters are shouting and Beauty Stewart is requesting from her 3 workers insanely where they are. She even gets a firearm and compromise them and advises them to leave, since they're not aiding her and they probably taken the shades. The youngsters head to sleep, however they then, at that point, move through the window since they need to search for their dad and they're somewhat frightened of their mom. Elegance is tearing separated the house searching for drapes. She goes into the workers' rooms and tracks down an envelope on the bed, containing a photo of Mr. Tuttle, Lydia, and Mrs. Factories, engraved 1891, from the Book of the Dead. The fogs are encompassing the island when Anne goes over the headstones of the 3 workers, and afterward she sees them somewhere far off. They're moving toward her and Nicholas, and the 2 of them run into the house with the workers following. Effortlessness is there and she locks them out, and advises her kids to stow away while she battles them off. Mrs. Factories then tells Elegance from outside the entryways that it's past the point of no return. Presently she needs to proceed to track down them herself. In the meantime, Nicholas and Anne run higher up into a closet, and stow away, yet the entryway is opened up to uncover a white-haired old woman with dark eyes, Renee Asherson. Also, everybody shouts, including Effortlessness who has shown higher up to now. The camera then, at that point, goes to a lounging around a table, gathering, including the old woman, presently going about as the speaker of the seance. She is asking the youngsters for what good reason they are waiting around in death. Spooky Anne and Spooky Nicholas shout that they aren't dead, while Spooky Effortlessness is snatching the paper and destroying them, shouting as well, and shaking the table, attempting to stand out. We see that the papers are flying up without anyone else and that the table is shaking, however don't see Effortlessness and the children. We can see just the frightened members of the seance, watching the visually impaired woman scrubbling like insane on a piece of paper in an euphoria. It then stops and the elderly person is woken up from the daze. We find what had truly occurred. Elegance had covered her youngsters in their rest, and afterward gave herself up to 14 days prior. The workers vanished, in light of the fact that their manager, Effortlessness, had passed on. The current tenants of the house are the piano player father, mother, and the kid Victor Merliush. They 3 will ultimately take off from the house because of the hauntings of Beauty and her youngsters. The 3 workers had kicked the bucket in the TB pestilence 50 years prior, and some way or another, everybody actually resides in the house, the residing next to each other with the dead. Effortlessness concedes to having gotten it done. The following morning, when she found herself alive once more and the kids pad battling, she thought it was one more chance for her to become a decent mother, as though her shocking acts had just been a bad dream. The film closes as the inhabitants, unfit to free the place of Elegance and the children, drive away with Effortlessness watching from a higher up window. The sign on the entryway says the house is available to be purchased. Beauty says that she and her youngsters won't ever take off from the house, as they have a place there. Thank you for watching and see you again in another movie story.